Hi, everyone. Tonight we will be starting with Chapter 6, which is different forms of business ownership. And I'm going to start by pulling up the PowerPoint lecture notes for Chapter 6. And just a reminder, always make sure that you're going in there and filling out the different lecture notes for the chapter as we go along so that you can use these to study from when you're doing your homework or when you are taking your exams. So, by the way, congratulations on taking the midterm exam. Good job, everyone. All right, moving on. So, there are several different forms of business ownership, and the oldest form of business ownership we call sole proprietorship. In sole proprietorship, a company's earnings are given the same treatment as the owner's earnings. The debts incurred by the company are incurred by the owner, and there is no protection for the owner. If somebody sues the company, that means they're suing the owner. If you lose, let's say somebody sues the company and and the courts award in the lawsuit $5 million, and all your business has is, I don't know, $20,000. Well, that might mean that they could, the courts could then, or they could then go after all of your personal assets. They will go after your house, your car, and not just your house and your car and everything that you own. They could go after your future assets. They could say, we will then garnish your wages in perpetuity until this $5 million lawsuit is paid off. So there's no protection for the owner in a sole proprietorship. There are a lot of different kinds of partnerships. There's general partnerships, there's limited partnerships, but the thing to remember about partnership, again, there is no protection against personal losses from the owner. And there is a partnership between the co-owners of a business. You have to have at least two people in a partnership. With sole proprietorship, you can only have one person. So if you had a married couple, you couldn't be sole proprietorship. You would have to be at least a partnership. And in a general partnership, the scary thing too is that the general partners, first of all, they have to take a role in managing the business. They have unlimited liability as a general partner against any claims against the business. And let's say one of the business partners decides that she's going to go out and buy a whole bunch of office equipment, and she's going to put that on the general partners tab, or on the partnerships tab. Well, that would be a liability of the entire partnership. Let's say somebody else, the other partner, he goes out and he buys a new Maserati, but he's going to buy it for himself, but he puts it under the name of the business. Well, sorry, that goes against everyone in the general partnership. So there's no liability in that. So that can be problematic. So what do we do to protect ourselves? Well, a lot of people will start a corporation. A corporation is a separate legal entity that you have to file articles of corporation. You start it within the state agency. It's issued by the state. But the nice thing about corporations is you're protected. So if a business is owned as a corporation, it's separate from the owners. So if I were to sue the corporation, or if somebody was to sue the corporation for $5 million, and I only had as owner invested $5,000 into the corporation, all that I could lose is $5,000. I wouldn't lose the $5 million because that's separate. It's separate. And the thing about corporations is they kind of act like people because they can lawfully participate in business activities. They can do everything that a natural person can do, including influencing politics, which might be why we have some of the problems that we have in this day and age in this country. And a lot of people have maybe tried to stop that. But at any rate, the reason people will file for incorporation is because they have limited liability and the owners are separate from the corporation. However, there are a lot of requirements that are associated with an incorporation. You have to file articles of incorporation. You have to pay your incorporation fee to excuse me, whichever state in which you actually file for incorporation. You have to have meetings. You have to have a board of directors. It's required by law with every incorporation. It can be expensive, and it can be kind of problematic as well. So some people have chosen instead to file for an LLC, which is a limited liability company, and just like the name sounds, it offers limited liability for the owners, but with less regulation. And it's one of the newest forms of business ownership, and it's really popular because it has all the benefits of a corporation without any of the drawbacks. And there are different types of corporations. I don't know if I go through them. I'm trying to remember in the different chapters. I think I go through them. There are many different types of corporations, but we'll just be, and we'll, for now, well, we'll talk about them later, but for now, when I say corporation, think C corporation. That's the oldest form of corporation. And if you file for an incorporation, that's what you really file for first, and then you're granted a subchapter S or different kinds of corporation. But corporation, not to get off topic, is separate legal entity. Oh, and a person, a human being, when you are born, you're issued a SSN, a social security number. When you are born as a corporation, when somebody starts a new corporation, it's almost like a new human being. Instead of an SSN, you get an EIN, which is an employer identification number, very similar to social security number, in which you can do many, many, many different things and participate in many different legal things. What was I going to say about corporation? Whoa, we'll get to it. Okay, advantages and disadvantages of all the different forms of ownership. Advantages of sole proprietorship is easy as can be. You retain all the control. You have pride of ownership. You get to keep all the profits. There are some tax advantages, but you can't raise funds. You have unlimited liability. People don't want to come work for sole proprietorship because just because of in very essences the way the ownership is, you can't even give away stock options. There's no stock in a sole proprietorship. It's just a sole proprietorship. You own everything, and there's lack of permanence. By that I mean, if you die as the owner of a sole proprietorship, what happens to sole proprietorship? It dies as well, right? It doesn't go on in perpetuity the way that a corporation does. Corporation is separate, so it lives on after the owner. A partnership, okay, in a general partnership, there is no limit on the number of partners. And a partnership is formed when the partners enter into a voluntary partnership agreement, and partnership is based on due to the nature of a partnership, it should be a written contract. Although, if you were to form a verbal partnership, there could be legitimacy as well. However, I highly recommend that you draw up a well-written, fully executed partnership so that you can minimize the probability of any misunderstandings in that partnership. So advantages and disadvantages of partnership include, you're working with another human being. So you have more people involved. You can pool resources. You can share responsibility. There are some tax advantages, but, and it's easy to form, but unlimited liability. You could disagree. There's lack of continuity. By that, I mean, if one person dies, the partnership dies. And it's hard to withdraw from a partnership. There are better forms of ownership. I'd say if you were going to go for the easiest form of ownership, it's sole proprietorship. The most risky form of ownership, partnership. There are also limited partnerships, though, in which there's a general partner and there's at least one general partner, and then there's at least one limited partner. And the limited partner, we also sometimes call these silent partners, right? They give up their right to manage the organization, and they don't have any control of how the business is run. But in exchange for that, to be a silent partner means that they don't have any liability, which is kind of cool. And in a limited liability partnership, all partners have an LLP, a limited liability partnership, it limits the personal risk of all of the involved partners, and you get that limited liability for all of the debts. So limited liability partnership can mitigate some of the disadvantages of partnership, but again, there are better forms of business ownership. Corporation, for one, starting with C Corp. A C Corp is the most basic form of corporation. It's limited liability. Every corporation is. All of the stockholders, and that's what we call owners of a corporation, have limited liability. We form it by by issuing our articles of incorporation. We pay the filing fees. We adopt corporate bylaws. They're typically, you've heard people say, oh, well, we'll file in a different state or a different country. No. Well, you can also file in different countries, but in order to minimize the fees associated with them, and you can do that. However, there are restrictions depending on where you file. Stockholders can be institutional investors in a C corporation. You can have unlimited investors, and you can have as many investors as you want, is basically what I mean. They can be institutional, meaning that they can come from investors, from clients, from depositors, and they don't have to be U.S. citizens in a C corporation. But C corporations are expensive. They're very expensive, and there are some major disadvantages to C corporations. I'll get to them in just a few minutes. What was I going to say about this? So we can use our pooled funds to buy stocks and securities of other corporations. When we issue stock in a C Corp, you issue common stock as the basic ownership interest. Some corporations will issue preferred stock as well, and preferred stock and common stock, I don't want to get into too many details, but essentially preferred stock, you get paid dividends first, and dividends are how you earn profit out of a corporation. So that's that. Oh, board of directors is required in every corporation by law. A board of directors is made up of the executives of the corporation. It's elected by the stockholders. They're elected to represent their interests. And that's why when we say that a corporation's job is to maximize shareholder wealth, well, that's by law. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to look out for the interests of the owners above everything else. The board of directors appoints the CEO, which is the chief executive officer, and then the other officers that are required by law, including the secretary, the COO, which is the president, the CFO, etc., financial officer, etc. So C corporations, the reason we love them, there's limited liability, there is permanence. So if I die and I have a corporation, I have right now, what 3 corporations, my corporations live on. It's almost like having a kid, right? You nurture it, you do all these things, and then you die and the corporation goes on and on and on. It's really easy to transfer ownership. It's really easy to raise capital and to hire specialized management. But there are some major disadvantages to a C corporation. It's expensive, it's complex, it's you're required by law to meet every so often, and when you're operating in multiple states, there's even more laws. It gets confusing, and the worst part about a C corporation is double taxation. You're taxed twice when you own a corporation. So I'll explain what that means. Let's say my corporation this year earned $150,000 by selling coffee mugs. Okay, so I've earned $150,000 selling coffee mugs. The very first thing that I need to do is I need to pay taxes on the $150,000 in profit at the corporate level. Then what I need to do is I need to take some money out of it so that I get paid as an individual, as the CEO of the corporation. So all of the money that goes through the corporation comes to me. Let's say I leave $50,000 in there and I take $100,000 as profit for me, and I pay that as dividends or whatever I paid as stock options, whatever. Then that $100,000, I have to pay tax on it again. So I had to pay tax on that same money twice. Doesn't seem fair, right? There's a lot of paperwork. If it's a publicly traded company, there's no secrecy, and there can be some serious conflicts of interest. So there are other types of corporations in which we can get rid of that those issues, including an S corporation. Love an S corporation. It's different than a C corporation in that it's taxed only once. However, you can only form an S corporation if you have, if it's a smaller company, like 100 or less stockholders, and every single stockholder has to be a U.S. citizen. Now, one other thing I wanted to say about this is, if I wanted to be an S corporation, the way that the rules work, you actually file for C corporation, and then you will be granted subchapter S corporation, statutory, or nonprofit corporation. And we talked about this in chapter 1, but I just wanted to clarify that a nonprofit is a type of corporation, but it is it's called nonprofit, and the reason is because we don't take the profits and give them to the owners, because there are no owners. There are no owners. Instead, we have people who run the company, right? They work for the company. They don't own the company. We don't have stockholders. We don't distribute dividends. And 501c3s or nonprofits, we cannot contribute to political campaigns the way that other corporations can. We really have to be really diligent about our record keeping to show that we're helping society with these, with our corporation, our nonprofit corporation. And but there are tax advantages. We don't have to pay any federal tax or state income tax. And there's no liability for we don't call them owners, but for the people who manage, and we call them members, the members of the nonprofit. So there's good things and there's bad things, but you have to carefully consider which type of organization makes more sense. All right, moving on. Where are we? Acquisitions. Okay. So a couple things that you need to know about corporate restructuring. There are things called M&A, divestiture. So M&A is merger or acquisition. In acquisition, the buying firm is known as the acquiring firm, and the firm that is purchased is known as the target firm. And after the process is over, the target firm ceases to exist. It's gone. But the acquiring firm continues to trade its stock, because the stock becomes part of the acquiring firm. A merger is when two formerly independent businesses become one new business. There's horizontal mergers, there's vertical mergers, and there's conglomerate mergers. One thing I want to say about mergers and acquisitions, almost always, so in an acquisition, a big firm is buying a little firm. A merger, two firms are becoming one, right? Almost always, acquisitions, mergers, divestitures, everything are always touted as mergers. And the reason is, think about, remember when Disney bought Pixar? I know this is a long time ago, but when Disney bought Pixar, they acted like it was a merger of Disney and Pixar. Now think about this, Disney and Pixar. Disney was huge. Pixar was tiny, but they still touted it as a merger. Why would you do this? Well, the reason that you do this is because in a merger, you still get to keep the independence, the autonomy of each of the companies. And so, and the customers, the client base of each of the companies rather. And so Disney could pretend that they were merging with Pixar, and so that all the Pixar fans would still be Pixar fans, right? And also, you see this happen a lot because, sometimes people are acquiring another firm for the way that the firm is, because Disney at the time, they were not popular. They were a little bit racist, a little bit sexist, and Pixar was young and doing everything right, so they wanted it to be more of a merger. Well, anyway, we could talk for hours on this, but let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about an LLC. LLC, people always get confused by this, because LLC, you think limited liability corporation. No, limited liability company. It acts like a corporation in that the owners do not have personal liability, but it is not a corporation. It's a company. And organizers draw up an operating agreement. It's like the bylaws of a corporation, but it is not the bylaws of a corporation. They're not partnerships. They're not corporations. And just like a nonprofit, when you own an LLC, we call you a member, not a stockholder, not a partner. There are many advantages of LLCs. They're right now the most popular type of business. Limited liability, no double taxation, just like that S corporation, right? And I told you that about an S corporation, right? An S corporation, you don't have to pay the double taxation like a C corporation. In an LLC, you also don't have to pay double taxation. You're only taxed once. It's called a pass-through corporation. It can be a little bit different from state to state. You do have to pay franchise taxes, which are state taxes, but and it is a little bit complex to form, but it's not as complex as corporation. So if you are going to form a corporation and you meet all the criteria for S corporation, form an S corporation so you have that single taxation, or an LLC. So compare the two and then choose. Franchising. So franchising is one of the most popular ways to operate a business and to enter a business as an entrepreneur without starting from totally scratch, right? Distributorships and business format franchises are the most common types of franchise arrangements. In a distributorship, the franchisor, the person giving the franchise, allows the franchisees, the person who's buying the franchise, to use to make its product, and then grants the distributors a license to sell the product. In a business format franchise, the franchisor, the person making the franchise, grants the franchisee, the person buying it, the right to make and sell their goods or services. And I talked about these two, distributorships and business. All right. So a little bit about franchising today in today's economy. One of the biggest trends in franchising for the past several years has been an expansion into foreign markets. And another notable trend has been the growth in the number of women franchisees. Particularly, there's so many different franchisees where women are really growing. KFC, so many women owning KFCs. Right now, women own about 45% of all franchises. One thing I wanted to say about franchises, not as many minorities have been buying them. And not sure what the cause is to that right now, but franchises are an excellent way to become an entrepreneur without totally starting from scratch. Like I said, there are many advantages and disadvantages as noted here. And under the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission rules, the franchisor has to give the franchisee at least 14 calendar days to review the FDD, which is the franchise disclosure statement, which is a description of all of just everything in the franchise. And it's really important, though, that you review it and have other people review it, hire a lawyer to review it, because it can really help the franchisee to make an informed decision. There's a lot of money to be made in franchises, but you really need to be careful. There's a lot of scams as well. So these slides show some of the key items normally covered in a franchise agreement: terms, conditions, fees, training, operational requirements, conflict resolution, territory, etc. All right, so we're going to leave it there. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, night, I don't know, day, morning, I don't know when you're watching this, but it was a pleasure going over chapter 6 with you together, and I will see you all for the next chapter, which I believe is chapter 7. Have a good one.